Hi, so this is it. Today I'm going to be talking about my capstone project. I have attached a bullet point handout and I'm going to kind of go over it. So if you follow along that, then you'll pretty much kind of understand what I'm saying and it'll be hopefully pretty much easy to follow. So let's get started. So the brand name that I came up with for this project is Techniques for Life, and I chose this project because I often hear people saying in the department, what technique would you use for this? Or what would you use for this anatomy for a larger patient? So we have in our department technique charts, but they're outdated and they only relate to film screen, and they're everywhere, but they're kind of useless with the type of machinery that we have today with CR. So I think we should update these and have techs be able to glance at the chart and get the optimal image that they need no matter what anatomy it is or the patient's size. So the data that I can provide that relates to this project are repeat rates. I found that this data did not back up my project at all because the repeats that are done are not, they're because of positioning more likely than not, and not because of over or under exposure because of the techniques used. And I think this because we have the ability to post-process now on our computers. So my institution, Weiss Hospital, our repeat rate is 3.8% to 4.8% for the last 6 months, and our goal is to have 5% or less of repeats. So the repeats, you select a category when you want to make a repeat. So the highest category is positioning. So the amount of repeats due to over or under exposure was not that many at all, and it was a little bit surprising that it was such a low number, maybe one to 8 a month. So I talked about this with my director, and what we kind of thought the reasoning was because of post-processing. So a tech can be able to post-process on the computer if their image is over or underexposed and make it look optimal. So they may think that they don't need to do a repeat because they can make it look better. So that was kind of what we agreed upon. And stay tuned, I have research to back that up. And also, our system doesn't count it as a repeat if you take another image and send them both through to the radiologist. So that's also kind of hard to tell. Well, if it is overexposed, you may take another one that's more of a correct technique, but send them both through to give the radiologist more information. Well, that doesn't count as a repeat. So it's only a repeat if the image is going to be rejected. So comparing data to the national averages would be, so again, my institution, Weiss Hospital, has a goal of 5% or less, and some research that I found was New Jersey's Department of Health. They actually also believe to have a goal of less than 5%. In the book that we had for school, Bouchong, Radiologic Science for Technologists, they say that the frequency of repeats has been estimated to be as high as 10%, but the goal for a typical busy hospital shouldn't be more than 5%. So it seems like everyone is kind of in the same place, so that's good. There's consistency with that. And I did a little bit of research to kind of back up my ideas that the director and I found. So in that book that I just mentioned, Radiologic Science for Technologists, so they had a couple interesting things that they mentioned. So the area of repeat rate exams, this area, techs can influence that. So we have the power to be able to cause more radiation or be able to prevent giving the patient more radiation. So that's pretty powerful. And the exams that had the highest repeat rates were lumbar spine, thoracic spine, chest, and abdomen. So I found that really interesting too. the most repeats by a tech is caused by their error, so positioning and improper techniques. So those are the main reasons for repeats. Just another fact about that the book said about what are the reasons for some repeats. So those could be equipment malfunction or motion or improper collimation. So I researched a couple of articles besides in the book, and in the first article I had, it talked about what techniques are and why they're important, and it was a really interesting article because it was kind of speaking to radiologists, and so they could understand how the image is created and like how it can connect to them interpreting it. So it's also important for them to know of if an image is over or underexposed. So it also talked about patient dose, that the milliampere per second, the mass, if it's too low, then quality gets compromised. So the image is grainy and it looks like there's noise and spots everywhere. But if the mass is high, then the patient is unnecessarily exposed, but it allows the image to look less grainy. So our goal is to make sure that our images have diagnostic quality without having the patient being exposed to unnecessary radiation. So I like this article because it showed how important techniques were and how much they affected patient safety. This ties into the next article I researched, which is talking about today's technology. We have wider exposure latitude. We have post-processing algorithms, and this allows to mask the evidence that there was ever over or under exposure. So, like I mentioned before, mass that's too low causes noisy, grainy images, and this can kind of become an issue with a radiologist needing to diagnose something with a patient. But with the overexposure and the more mass, that improves image quality, but it also increases patient dose. So what this is known as is dose creep. So people are using a higher exposure to make better image quality, but they're increasing their patient dose. So we want an optimal image that won't give the patient too much radiation, but will also give a really great image for the radiologist to read. So less repeats are needed for due to exposure selection errors because of the ability to post-process. So this kind of shows us that you have to know your techniques to be able to have quality and optimal images without compromising patient dose. So I thought those were really interesting and how dose creep ties into it. So for this project, how am I going to collect my data and my source of information? What is all that? So the data I'm going to be collecting will be the exposure indexes of images on the computer. So at Weiss Hospital, we use a system called AGFA, and the monitors where we scan our images will be able to see the exposure indexes once our images are up on the computer, and that will be our source of information. So once the image is up there, the goal of our exposure index will be to have a number between 1.5 and 2.5. And it also, if your image is closer to 2, so in the middle of those two numbers, then our image would be considered in the green. And it actually shows you a little either green or yellow or red, depending on where you were with your exposure. So if your number is higher, you would be overexposed. If your number is lower, then you would be underexposed. So the process could be, someone would be appointed to be having this job, and they would look at random images throughout the month, collect images, and see which ones are in the green or not. And from there, you can tell what technologist took that image by their marker. If they did implanted a marker, then you can look on PACS and see who reviewed that study on PACS. So This way, you can see if the technologist is following this new technique chart and if they're in the green or if they're overexposed or underexposed. So that's a way how to collect the data. And then regarding the stakeholders. So there are a couple important stakeholders who are going to be impacted by this project. We have the director, the radiologist, and the x-ray techs. So the director, their goal is she oversees all the staff, and she wants to make sure that dose is the lowest possible without compromising the image quality. So she wants better safety practices, and she also wants the radiologist to be happy with optimal images. So a big thing here is satisfaction. So we want the radiologist to be happy, we want the techs to be able to know how to use proper techniques, and we want to make sure our images are still not being compromised. The radiologists, they are impacted by this project because they need to receive optimal images to get the most accurate reading done without having the image be too light or too dark. X-ray techs, they're impacted because they're the ones on the front line taking the images, using this new technique chart to be able to provide optimal images. So, it shouldn't have to be a challenge to figure out which technique to use. It would be nice to just glance at a chart, see it, and be able to apply it right then and there. So how am I going to get buy-in from these stakeholders? And what's their role with the process improvement? So the key is we want to provide the safest care to our patients while achieving these optimal images. So for the director, the buy-in would be, we would explain that this would achieve a LARA as low as reasonably achievable, and the director actually has meetings with the CEO, and they ask, well, what are our repeat rates? We want to keep these to a minimum. So this is going to help our director see, well, now we have this technique chart that's going to really help bring all those repeats down, and eliminate the over and under exposure issue with repeat rates and only have to worry about positioning. So we can achieve optimal images while also providing safer care to our patients. So the radiologists, they want the buy-in because they will receive the optimal images. So it won't be an issue where, sometimes you'll have overexposed images or maybe a chest x-ray that's a little underexposed for a larger patient. Well, they'll be receiving optimal images on a consistent basis, and they won't have to question us of, can you guys do a repeat because this one looks a little bit too overexposed. So hopefully they won't have any issues with that. And the x-ray techs, they're a little bit trickier to get the buy-in from them. But these exposure indexes, they're going to be part of their evaluations. So just like a tech will be evaluated by their repeat rates, the exposure indexes, and if they are getting in the green, that's going to be part of their evaluations. So if they stick to the new technique chart and they have proper exposure indexes, then their evaluations won't be affected negatively, but they would actually help them get evaluated better. So it's kind of it's a win-win to help them do their job better and also increase their evaluations. So I do have a couple of challenges and obstacles with this project. So for my first challenge, it's technologists. Technologists who learned CR and DR and they know how to do it, but they do it their own way, and they may be inconsistent, and they don't want to change how they've been doing it. But then there's also the techs who learned with film screen, so they never really got the proper education about DR and CR and how it affects your technique and how to change it and what to use with this new equipment. So some solutions are education. So education and practice, and it'll help them understand x-rays differently and hopefully better to improve their techniques. There's also going to be mandatory meetings that technologists will actually have to sign off that they understand the new use of these technique charts, and the exposure indexes will be checked, to make sure that they're participating properly. They're actually going to need to sign off at the end of this meeting that they understand, and they'll follow it, and if they have any questions, they can ask. So if it isn't understood by everyone, and not everyone gets it, there will be an option to also have private meetings, one-on-one, and teach it to hopefully make it a little bit clearer. So that's our first challenge. Our second challenge is that our rooms in the department don't all operate the same. So we have GE, we have Philips, and we have Siemens. So they're all a little bit different. And you also hear techs say, you have to use higher kVp in this room, or higher mass in that room. Well, I think if we get a technique chart, we can kind of assess it with each room and see how it can be tweaked, but hopefully have it be more baseline, to have it all kind of be more of the same. So the solution is we can come up with a technique chart, and we can use a phantom to test out the chart and see how accurate it is in each room, and then we can make adjustments where necessary. So how am I going to actually implement this project? That's the big question. So some steps that I have thought about was, first I have to talk to the director. I have to see what she thinks about it, if she wants buy-in, and we'll talk about the steps for implementation and why it's beneficial to the department, similar to what I mentioned above. And then from there, we could set up a few meeting dates about educating the staff, and then about these new charts and all of that. So, and then from there, everybody would sign that they understand this is the new way, and that we want to use these charts to be able to provide optimal images. Radiologists would also be talked about at this. They would be talked to at this point in time about their participation, about having to review monthly images regarding over and under exposure to kind of keep it fresh in everyone's mind. But more about that in a little bit. After this, I would come up with a technique chart, and we could test it out in each room with a phantom, and see from there about how it applies to each room. After this, we would have a monthly check of the exposure indexes. We could start that. So it's similar to the repeat rate analysis, but it's a little bit different. So a volunteer or a tech that's chosen would be responsible for this as one of their tasks, and random exams would be chosen throughout the month to kind of create a graph and kind of measure our success. That will be a way how we could measure the success. And then if the indexes are not matching up, then there can be another one-on-one meeting to, maybe they didn't get it with everyone, but they thought they did. So there can also be that private meeting to go over it again. So, not every tech learns well in a group. So this might be what they need to be able to really understand it. And then from there, if a technologist still isn't understanding it, the next step is disciplinary action. So the timeline for this implementation, it's about a 1-month process. So first, week 1, I would talk to the director and present the idea. And then the second week, I would talk to the director again, see where we are, and if we can set up a couple dates for the meeting for every X-ray tech to attend. So whether it's a morning shift, mid-shift, evening shift, overnight shift, we'll have to set up those different dates at different times to make sure everybody can come. And at this time, I can also start coming up with a technique chart. Maybe we can work as a group, and different techs can come up with different anatomy parts. We can all be responsible for something different, so that we can work out in the details later. And then in the 4th week, all the meetings should have already been done, and the techs have signed off that they completed the meetings. The tech who is going to be doing the exposure index checks should already be identified, and we can begin the monthly exposure index checks. From here, there will be monthly reviews of the exposure indexes, and they'll be closely monitored for the first year to make sure that this is really effective and the point is getting across and people are following it. So what resources do I need to implement this project? I need phantoms. So I'm going to come up with my technique chart, and then for each room, I'm going to need phantoms to test those techniques out. I don't want to use my patients as guinea pigs. So we can have the phantoms serve as the average person, and then from there, we can adjust it, whether it's a smaller or a larger patient, based on that average technique. So we don't get many pediatric patients, but should it be necessary, we can also come up with a pediatric mini chart also for common exams that we do get, like a chest or extremities. So also, we need the X-ray rooms to be our resource. So we have to make sure that they're vacant at times throughout the day so we can test out the phantoms on those rooms. So that will be tricky. It might have to be done at random hours in the day, so we'll have to see about that. That's a resource also needed. So quantitative success. What was my original status that needed to be improved, and when am I going to measure the success? So my original status, I saw this was an issue, and it needed to be improved upon with the question that people are always asking, what technique should I use, as well as images that we're sending through that may or may not be of optimal quality for the radiologist. So I wanted to provide better patient safety care and also obtain more optimal images. When to measure the success? So once the employees sign off at the meetings, it'll be noted that once everyone signed off, then we'll start measuring the project's success. We're going to do a monthly check of our repeat rates. So this is part of someone's monthly task, as I mentioned, and then every month those results will be closely monitored to see how effective this project really is. And we'll have a graph or a chart that will show also where are we from month to month, and are we going up or are we going down, and how effective is this process. So how much data am I going to need to determine the effectiveness of the plan? So I think about 12 months to be able to see a little bit of consistency from a couple months. The beginning might be a little bit unsteady, people are adjusting, so we want to make sure there's going to be consistency after a couple months and for a few months. So we'll see how that goes, and what are the further steps needed to implement this long term. So these monthly reviews of images done by radiologists, I said I would get back to this, so this is it. So if the radiologist could pull up images and critique them on a monthly basis, and how was the exposure, and how could it be improved, how does it affect how they read the image, I think this could keep it fresh in everyone's mind, and techs can see it firsthand of, oh, like this was really an issue, we need to work harder to make this better. So we need to provide those optimal images. And aside from that, it's also very educational for the techs to be able to have that opportunity to see a radiologist review images and see what they think about the images we take. So I think it's kind of nice. It'll be a cool dynamic to have that. So why would leadership approve my idea, and why do they want to even, get the buy-in, and how will this benefit the organization? Well, the true benefit is that it's providing safer care to patients. It's minimizing the dose, and it's also providing the optimal images to provide the most accurate diagnosis from the radiologist. So I think this is a really big key on why leadership can't say no to this idea. And how am I going to engage staff in the process improvement, and how am I going to get them to actively participate? So staff engagement is a big important concept that really needs to be there. You don't want to lose your staff's interest. So similar to what I mentioned previously, the exposure indexes will be assessed monthly, and so the staff will be engaged in there because their exposure indexes will be taken and be part of the overall average index. So this is going to be part of the staff's evaluation. So they really are going to want to have that desire to improve their images and provide those optimal quality images for the radiologist. So better evaluations, raises, and this will hopefully motivate them to improve. And I hope you enjoyed this project idea. That is all the information I have for you today. And I think this is a very realistic project, and it can really be a process that can improve the department and help everyone. So from the director, the radiologist, and the technologist, we can all learn from each other, be able to provide this project to be able to provide the best care we can to patients while also maintaining safety. So thank you for watching, and I hope you enjoyed this video.